There are guys I put on my giant radio show, and they reap the rewards of my giant audience. I asked a bunch of these guys on my podcast, and they said no, or ignored me, or had an excuse because I'm not big anymore. That pisses me off, if you want to know the truth. Seems like Bert would have you and Pat on his podcast, would be big for the numbers. I would go on Bert Kreischer's podcast. I try to get him on my little thing. And, a lot of these guys, I'm not big enough for them anymore. Oh, it's so frustrating. And I want to yell at some of these guys. And I'm not saying Bert in particular. There are guys I put on my giant radio show, that had no audience at all. And they reaped the rewards of my giant audience. And that's how things worked. And they contributed, and they gave me really good material, 100%. And then those same people have skyrocketed to fame and got giant podcasts. And not that I was asking to return the favor, but I asked a bunch of these guys on my podcast, and they said no, or ignored me, or had an excuse because I'm not big anymore. That pisses me off, if you want to know the truth. Because I took chances on so many people over the years. Burr fucking sold out. I don't see it that way. I don't see that at all. At all. And I'm a weird dude because Bill Burr would do my podcast tomorrow. But I don't really have like a professional setup these days. I'm wandering the streets. I turn it on here from my apartment 500 feet above the streets of New York. I do have a professional mic. So when I put this together as a podcast, the audio is way better than what you hear. I'll get a mic in 2023. But Bill Burr has always been a solid dude. Solid. The guy has never said no to me. If I text him, he texts me back. If I call him on the phone, he picks up every single time. I have literally no issues with Bill Burr. And I know if I said, hey, Bill, could you do my podcast next time you're in New York? He would do it in a second. I know that. So I would have to strongly disagree with this guy right here. Strongly disagree. Then there's other guys, and I don't really feel like naming names today. But all of a sudden I'll text somebody, and they don't even text back. I'm like, really, dude? Are you serious? Ah, God. When you're dealing with egos, it's exhausting. It's exhausting. Rogan is like, no, I mean, you can love Rogan all you want. I think he's a piece of shit. For real. Because there was a time Rogan's podcast wasn't huge, and we put him all over our channel. He was on our channel on the weekends. He was coming in. He was great on our show. I really loved him on our show, and he absolutely delivered. And we gave him massive promotion. And then, I got kicked to the curb, and I had to start all over. And I started texting people to be on my podcast, especially in the early days when I was still going for guests and stuff. And honestly, more people than not said yes, and they were on the podcast. If you go all the way back in my podcast feed, you can see this for yourself. And then I just texted Rogan because he was in New York. And the guy literally did not get back to me. And then I called him out on it. And then I guess he said that he changed his number and stuff like that. I'm like, Joe, but you also know that I also DM'd you on the Twitter. And look, if he didn't want to do my podcast, that's one thing. But to completely ignore me, knowing what I did for him in the early days, that's a sign of a bad person, if you want to know the truth. So if you want to support Rogan and you think he's great, I have no problem with that. But I have to tell the truth about it. And then I effed up the whole thing because I made a video on the streets of New York, and I was twirling around because I was kind of trying to like get the sun out of my face and this and that. And then it was a little artsy, and then everyone made fun of my street video, which is fine. But the fact is, man, I needed some of these guys early on. And a lot of these guys understood that, and they did my podcast, including Bill Burr, including Stephen Lynch, who literally doesn't do much of anything. But he came to New York. I go, hey, man, you want to be on my podcast? He goes, sure. And he thanked me for everything I did for him over the years. Bill Burr came on. Honestly, the Bob Saget, the list goes on and on, and you can see all the names if you go back in my feed. And Rogan couldn't even write me back. That's when I turned on that guy. I'm like, oh, okay. At least fake it, like some of your brothers out there. At least they know how to fake it. He said you didn't have his number. I just explained. I had a number that I believe to this day still works, and I also DM'd him on the Twitter. He was surprised that I called him out, and then he had to come up with something. Because a lot of these guys, this crap happens to them, and then they just keep their mouths shut and don't say anything. But I'm like, fuck that. I'm going to say something. Plus the fact, if he didn't have my number, right, which I know is bullshit, because he follows me on Twitter still, and I don't know, I haven't checked in a while, and I DM'd him. But let's say what you said is true. If he knew that I was mad, right, and if he knew what I did for him in the early days, not that he's way bigger than I ever was. Let's acknowledge that as well. And if he gave two shits about me, he still has my number, bitch. Cheers.